Hello everyone, hope you're doing alright. Today we're talking about Deception Assassin at long last. Brief disclaimer as usual, I'm not an expert on this spec, I'm just a nerd that plays a lot of SWTOR. If you have any recommendations, things that I missed, feel free to leave them down in the comments below. I'm sure your fellow players would appreciate it. Alright, let's dive into this thing. Accuracy, 110% in PvE every single time. It's very important. In PvP though, you can kind of get rid of it all. You don't really need it. For alacrity, 7.2% alacrity is pretty much what you're looking for. That'll compensate for most of your lag issues, and then throw everything else into crit and you should be ready to rock and roll. For our tactical, Blade of the Elements is very, very nice. It's going to make our Reaping Strikes essentially crit every single time we use it. It's pretty darn great. If you're looking at ranked PvP though, you should probably get 2 Cloaks. It's pretty darn important. Legendaries, Force Training Package is just flat 3% extra damage. It's pretty boring, but it's the best for us, so we take it. Dynamic Force Package is going to decrease the cooldown recklessness by 15%. Not 15, by 15 seconds. Very boring. Very boring, but it's just the best in the slot, so it's what we take for us. For a combat style, Energized Blade is going to make our Reaping Strike cooldown reset every time we crit with a force attack, which is very nice. We take this pretty much every time. Overload, very obnoxious. Great ability, we love to see it. Voltaic Engine is going to give us 10% crit chance every time we have Voltaic Slash, which is going to be essentially a flat 20% crit. It's just unbeatable. It's amazing. Take this every single time. Lightning Engine is going to help out with our force management, and it's going to give us a little bit of healing. The healing, it beats poke in the eye, but the force management is very, very nice for us. In PvE, Formless Phantom, very nice. It's AoE DR, we love to see it. In PvP, you can take Dark Stability to give that little bit of CC immunity when you use your deflection, but for the most part, Formless Phantom is kind of where it's at. Moving the line here, Force Phase is very, very nice, almost in all content. It's a root break. It's pretty darn fantastic. Some people will take Obfuscating Speed for encounters where you don't really need a root break, or just Lambast whenever you're doing flat out AoE spam. It's alright, you know, not great, not terrible, but if you don't have any benefit from the other two options, you can totally take Lambast. Moving the line, Force Shroud and Whirlwind. Pick your poison. If you like the DCD, take Force Shroud. If you like the CC, take Whirlwind. Finally, Shroud of Madness is just the best in this tier. Having the 2 seconds of Force Shroud after using Force Cloak is pretty darn nice. It'll purge all those dots off of you, which is very, very nice, and it helps you get out of combat faster, or it's just ways to avoid mechanics if you're in PvE, so it's just kind of the best. Some people will take Reaper's Rush in phases like Clock Phase, but it's really situational, and Shroud of Madness is just always useful. But that stuff is all boring. Let's talk about actually doing damage. Fortunately, doing damage in this spec comes down to basically these 5 abilities and nothing else. It's pretty darn nice. When I say nothing else, there are other things that happen, but we don't really worry about them most of the time. So let's talk about it. If you learn nothing else from this entire presentation, just know that you need to have 2 stacks of voltage up at all times. Voltage is this little buff right here of a guy like gripping his saber with a little 2 next to it. That is voltage. We want to make sure that we have 2 stacks of voltage up at all times. The voltage buff lasts for 15 seconds. It's going to give us that 20% crit chance, which is very, very nice. It's going to give us Ball of Lightning, automatically proccing our discharge, which is very, very nice. It's just the best buff in the game. If you let it fall off, you're throwing, because you're not going to have those fat crits anymore. The way we build these stacks of voltage is by using Voltaic Slash, which is what we use for single target, and then Lacerate, which is what we use for AoE. Both of these abilities will build a stack of voltage of voltage. We can use Lacerate before the fight even starts to start building up to those 2 stacks of voltage, but be aware that right now there is a bug in the game where it's not actually giving you your 20% crit chance if you're using this outside of combat. So once you get into combat, you'll have to use either Voltaic Slash or Lacerate right away, or not right away, but as you get going to really buff up that crit chance, so that way you get that fat 50% crit chance all the time. It's very, very nice. Future mark here, I know it technically does say that it's only stacks built by Voltaic Slash. However, there's no buff to coincide with this, so people don't really think about it after they use this. So I consider it to be a bug. It'd be really nice if they just, you know, either provided a separate buff to keep track of this buff or this utility, or they just made it all one. So this technically isn't a bug. It's just really annoying if you don't like memorize the exact wording of every single utility you've taken from, you know, 40 levels ago. There you go. If I haven't made this perfectly clear, you'll want to be keeping these 2 stacks of voltage up at all times. If you let them fall off, you're throwing. All right? Is that clear enough? Have I beat that into your skull? Let me do it one more time. You have 15 seconds to reapply voltage. If you don't, I'm going to find you. I'm going to make you respec to hatred because you can't handle deception. All right? Just use voltage. Use voltaic slash. Keep that voltage stack up. It's very, very important. In fact, it's the most important part of this entire rotation. But it doesn't do a lot of damage. And if you know me, you know that I like to do big boy damage. Well, fortunately, we have the most high damaging ability that we have in our rotation in the form of Reaping Strike. Reaping Strike is a great little ability here. It does like 40k to 50k damage to the target. Is going to be critting every single time because of our tactical, which is, again, the reason why we want to keep voltage up at all times is because by having 2 stacks of voltage, we are going to make our Reaping Strike crit every single time. Reaping Strike does a boatload of damage to the target. It's just fantastic. We love it. We love it. But it has a relatively long cooldown. You can see here it has like a 16 to 17 second cooldown. How do we get that lower? Well, I'm glad you asked me, because every time that we crit with a direct force attack that includes discharge and ball of lightning and, say, electrocute or low slash, or some people even use slow to proc it, every time we crit with one of these force attacks, we will get Reaping Strike back, which means we can go like Reaping Strike and then force attack, and then Reaping Strike and then force attack, and then Reaping Strike and then force attack, back and back and back and back and back, assuming that you get lucky. Now, there is some dark secrets here that people don't like to talk about, is that if you want to do big damage as deception, you gotta get lucky. Sorry, it just is what it is. If you are having a bad pull, you aren't getting the crits on the force attacks that you need to, you're just not going to do as much damage. So this is kind of a roll of the dice and just hope you crit on your force attacks so that way you get your Reaping Strikes back as quickly as possible. Sometimes you get lucky, sometimes you don't. It's really up to a roll of the dice, but sometimes you can go on crazy monster rolls and make sure that you get a whole bunch of crits back to back to back to back to back, which is going to make our Reaping Strike come off a cooldown over and over and over again. So again, Reaping Strike, most important ability. It's awesome. We love to see it. Hit it pretty much every single time. Just going to smash that Reaping Strike every time it's available to us. But let's talk about the other abilities now. You're going to notice that there's a lot of glowing buttons in this spec, and there's a reason for that. It's because they're all proccing into each other. Let's talk about the next most important ability here called Discharge. Discharge is available to us often, but is only glowing when we have 3 stacks of static charge. Now, there are a couple ways that we are going to be using or generating these static charges. The first is just by doing regular melee attacks. Every time you do a melee attack, you have a 50% chance to build 1 stack of these static charges. That can happen once every 6 seconds, though. So what that means is over the course of the next 18 seconds, you'll slowly build up these static charges just by doing melee attacks. That'll get you up to 3 stacks of static charge. When you're at 3 stacks of static charge, your discharge will start to glow. You basically only want to use discharge when it's glowing because that's when it's going to do the most amount of damage. So we don't really want to waste it using on 1 or 2 stacks. Just wait until you have 3 stacks of static charge and then smash that discharge button. It's a lot of damage and it has a chance to proc our Reaping Strikes. And as we discussed previously, we want to be smashing Reaping Strikes as often as possible. So there are a couple of other ways, though, that we can be slowly generating these stacks of static charge. So we discussed previously just by doing melee damage, we will build up to these 3 stacks of static charge. But what if I want to force the game to give me a static charge? Well, that's why we have this button called Ball Lightning. Now, Ball Lightning is going to always give us a stack of static charge, assuming you have 2 stacks of voltage. Remember how we discussed for 3 minutes straight about how you have to have 2 stacks of voltage up at all times? This is another one of the reasons why. Because now, every time that Ball Lightning is glowing, it means that we have 2 stacks of voltage up, which means it's going to force the game to give us a stack of discharge every time that we use a Ball of Lightning. It's essentially forcing the game to give us stacks of discharge. That way, we're not waiting for 18 seconds. We're waiting for 8 or 9 seconds between our static charges, which is very, very nice. So, Ball lightning, assuming you have 2 stacks of voltage up, is one way to generate a stack of discharge. But there are also other ways of generating stacks of discharge. For example, I'll just spend them right now. I know I'm going to be bad. We can use our recklessness to give us 3 stacks of discharge. Recklessness isn't on this little priority system here because it has a fair bit of a cooldown, as like a minute and 10-second cooldown. But recklessness will instantly generate 3 stacks of discharge, which is very, very nice. If you see here, recklessness on the target, all right, 3 stacks of discharge right away. Recklessness is also going to increase our critical chance by like 60%. And what that means is that it's essentially going to auto crit every single time, which means that we can go like force attack into reaping strike, into ball lightning, into reaping strike, into one more discharge, into reaping strike. That's a lot of damage. That's a lot of damage. All right. So what it's going to do is it's going to make your next force abilities have a lot more chance to have that crit chance. It's essentially going to auto crit. It says it's like 60% chance, but on top of the extra stacks of voltage that we have, it's basically an auto crit for all of our force attacks, which is going to be resetting our reaping strike over and over and over again. Pretty darn nice ability that we should be using very, very often. It's a way to quickly generate discharge stacks, so we love to see it. For those of you that were eagle-eyed, you're going to notice that we found a different way to generate 3 stacks of discharge there when we were doing a little recklessness demonstration. Good. That's because every time you use your Phantom Stride, which is your leap ability, you will also generate 3 stacks of discharge. Phantom Stride is going to move you. It's like a 30-second cooldown. It's going to try to put you behind the target as best as it can, and it's going to give you instantly 3 stacks of discharge. It's essentially another way to instantly generate those 3 stacks of static charge. So let's recap that very quickly for those of us that were paying attention. The first way to build a static charge, just do melee damage. You have the 50% chance to generate a stack of static charge every single time you use a melee ability. That can happen once every 6 seconds. Additionally, when we have our 2 stacks of voltage up, every time you use our ball lightning, you will instantly generate 1 stack of discharge, which is very, very nice. We can spend our discharge that way. Additionally, recklessness will instantly get us 3 stacks of discharge, which is very, very nice. And it's going to give us a whole bunch of auto crits back to back to back, which we can use to combo into our reaping strike. Pretty darn cool. And finally, our Phantom Stride is a third way to instantly generate 3 stacks of discharge. It's very, very nice. And it gives us, again, a bunch of damage very, very quickly. So those are the primary ways that we're going to be slowly generating our 3 stacks of static charge. That way we can hit the nice glowing discharge button and then do a whole bunch of damage. But what about between then and now? What if we don't have 3 stacks of discharge yet? Well, then we look at the remaining abilities here and say, yes, this is the end of the priority system. Ball lightning is our next most important ability. It's going to do like a fair bit of damage. It's going to occasionally do a little bit more damage. It's very RNG dependent. It'll sometimes trigger a second smaller ball of lightning, but it's all RNG. You can't really control it. And again, every time you have 2 stacks of voltage up, it's going to instantly generate a stack of discharge. So it's great. It's a great little ability. It is the 3rd most important ability in our rotation. Finally, we have Maul. Maul is not a place that people go shopping anymore, and it's not the Darth. It's our ability that does more damage when you're standing behind the target, and it also consumes a lot of force. You can see if you spam Maul over and over and over again, you're going to destroy all of your force. You're going to be very, very sad. Fortunately, force generation in this spec is very forgiving, so you just like wait 2 seconds, it'll fix itself. However, every 10 seconds, you're going to get this little buff here called Duplicity, which is going to mean that the damage of Maul is increased and the force consumed by Maul is decreased by like 75%. So essentially, it's a free Maul that's going to do more damage. It's very, very nice. It's essentially our filler ability when it comes to doing damage on Deception. I forgot to mention this. Maul also sunders the target, so that way it has 20% less armor, which is very nice. It's a great ability. We should be using it a lot. So, here's how these abilities all kind of work together. You want to be keeping Voltaic Slash to keep up our 2 stacks of voltage. That's the most important thing here. Everything else here can kind of get stuffed. The most important part of this entire spec is making sure that we have our 2 stacks of voltage up at all times. From there, we kind of just work down the line of this little priority system of Reaping Strike if it's available, then Discharge if it's glowing, then Ball of Lightning if it's glowing, and then you just kind of spam Maul in between that. That's all it is. That's really all it is. And what we'll be doing throughout this is that we will be using our Recklessness and our Phantom Stride to instantly build those 3 stacks of Discharge, right? So for example, if we're doing damage to the target right now, we have our 2 stacks of Duplicity up, and we use our Reaping Strike, and then our Discharge, we can do something like Recklessness into Discharge, Reaping Strike, into Phantom Stride, into Discharge, Reaping Strike, into Ball Lightning. We need to recache our Voltaic Slash, Reaping Strike. And now you just follow this little basic priority system here, so that way just follow it down the line, we didn't get lucky with our stacks of Reaping Strike, that's sad. And now you just play from this little itsy bitsy priority system. And it's really that simple. Just look at what ability is available to you most recently, and then fill. And that's really all there is to this spec. Just kind of hit the glowing buttons. You're going to get into a pattern here where you're going to start to recognize like, yes, this is an opportunity for my Reaping Strike to reproc for us. So you'll get a little more familiar with like the buffs as they play into each other. A couple quick notes here. Some people ask about like Assassinate. Should we use it? Frankly, no. Maul is just doing straight up more damage than Assassinate is right now. So even when you get down into burn phase, top players just straight up ignore Assassinate. It just, on average, does less damage than Maul does, which is kind of sad. Additionally, because this rotation kind of plays into each other so much, there's not a lot of room for Assassinate in the priority tree. So most of the top players just straight up ignore Assassinate, which is, kind of sad. Additionally, when you're in this little rotation here, you can use like Force Slow and Electrocute or Low Slash to proc your Reaping Strike back to back to back. Some people find success with this, some people don't. If you do not get the crit on Force Slow, it's a DPS loss. If you get lucky and you do crit on Force Slow, it's a DPS gain because you get the Reaping Strikes back. So it's kind of up to you. Personally, I kind of ignore it, and I suggest you do as well until you start to learn more about the spec. But it's something you can throw out there, like when you're in PvP, you can be using your CC as a way to proc more of these Reaping Strikes. So let's quickly look at the, actually playing the game real quick. So we're going to, I'm not even gonna bother with an opener for right now. We're just gonna straight up start doing damage, make sure we have our 2 stacks of voltage up, and now we start from the beginning. So Reaping Strike, moving down the line here. All right, there we go, Reaping Strike procced again. Discharge, I'm going to instantly build with Recklessness, and then Reaping Strike, and then we'll go Ball Lightning, Reaping Strike again, and then we can do a Force Stride, and then Reaping Strike again, blah, 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 blah. Oh, I let my Voltage Spikes fall off, which is really sad, which means I got to swap to Hatred now. Please don't do that. And then just follow the basic priority system, back to back to back to back to back, and then, again, just play from this basic priority system, and you should be ready to rock and roll. It's pretty darn straightforward. Like, I wish there was more I could be telling you, but really the rules are just keep Voltaic Slash on, and then play this little priority system over and over and over again until the boss is dead, and that's about it. You can be using your Phantom Stride as a way to instantly generate these 3 stacks of Discharge. It's really up to you. Some people will put off using Reaping Stride, Phantom Stride and or Recklessness until you have just used Discharge. So that's kind of what I like to do. I'm not sure if there's like a meta way to do it. It kind of depends on how far away you are from your stacks. So for right now, like I'm at 3 stacks, I just use my Reaping or my Discharge. So I would be more likely to use my Recklessness now when I'm only at like 0 to 1 stacks of our static charge compared to being at 2 stacks. It's really up to you. It's more of like a play it as you see it situation. I'm sure there's some nerd that's going to be like, oh, actually, you should really use Recklessness and Phantom Stride all the time. That's fine. If it works for you, it works for you. You kind of just have to learn the spec by yourself at this point. I wish there was more I can tell you, but all you need to know is really just keep 2 stacks of Voltaic Slash on the target at all times, por favor, and then follow this basic priority system until the boss is dead. Reaping Strike, most important. Resets whenever you crit with a force attack. 3 stacks of Discharge, use it. Glowing Ball Lightning, use it. Maul spam from there, and you should be ready to rock and roll. Let's talk about our DCDs really quickly. Deflection, 50% chance to avoid damage. It's nice, it beats poke in the eye, but it's not a guarantee that you'll avoid all damage, which is pretty darn nice. Force Shroud increases your Force Tech immunity, so anything that's doing yellow damage to you, this will avoid, but any white damage, it will not avoid, so, be careful. Force Cloak is going to give us 2 seconds of that Force Shroud. It will purge any dots that we have on us at the time, which is very, very nice. Additionally, every time you get out of combat, your recklessness will be essentially reset, or it's going to lose a minute of its cooldown. So it's very nice in like PvP if you can get out of combat very quickly. In PvE, though, they kind of changed it up so that way you can't really get out of combat anymore in PvE. So it's kind of sad, but if you're like questing, every time you get out of combat, your recklessness will be available again. So you can kind of just go like Reaping Strike, discharge, Reaping Strike, discharge, although back to back to back to back. So if you are wondering why recklessness is coming back off cooldown so quickly, that's why that is happening. Finally, we need to talk about our crowd control. Deception is probably the greatest crowd control spec in the game right now. We have a lot of tools at our disposal. For example, Force Slow is going to slow the target by 50% for 6 seconds. It can be used every 10 seconds, which means you can keep a target at 50% speed for a very long chunk of time. It's a great way to keep people slowed and not chasing down your ranged DPS. Additionally, we have this ability here called Low Slash, which has a 14-second cooldown and is a 4-second stun, which means that you can be stunning people for a third of their life. 4 seconds out of 14, okay, a little less than a third of their life. This is the most annoying ability in the game. It has a 30-meter range, so that way you can be all the way across the map here and still be low slashing people for 4 seconds. It's very, very obnoxious. Additionally, as you can see here, it can also proc your Reaping Strike, which is very, very nice. Finally, we have our Electrocute, which has a 60-second cooldown, but has another 4-second stun. So you can go like low slash, or I'm sorry, you can slow them up, you can low slash them, you can electrocute them. If you have Whirlwind, you can do that as well. This is the ultimate CC spec. It can be very, very obnoxious. Finally, we have our Overload here, which is going to knock the target back and root them. It is only an 18-second CC, or 18-second cooldown. It's very obnoxious. You should be doing this all the time, and then everyone's going to hate you because you're a bad person, but that's okay because you're playing Deception instead of Hatred. So, you have a lot of CC here. You have a slow, you have a root, you have 2 CCs, 3 if you're taking Whirlwind, and then you have a leap in the form of Phantom Stride, and you can get around faster with Force Speed. That's kind of all I have for you at the moment. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them down in the comments below. I'll be sure to get back to you as soon as possible. Hope this was helpful to you. Enjoy playing Deception. It's a lot of fun. There's a lot of burst spec, and you know what? It just has interactions, which is a lot of fun. I will pray that you get lucky, because you kind of have to for this spec. All right. That's all I got. Duke has no comments, so neither do I. Like, subscribe, share a video with your friends. Hope this was enjoyable for you. Take care. Bye-bye.